The night the Apache drums fell, silent over Red Mesa was the same night the wind carried a warning. Across the lonely plains, rattling the shutters of a small timber cabin where a lone cowboy named Colton Hayes sat cleaning the dust from his worn boots, unaware that fate was already galloping toward him on painted horses and silent feet. The moon hung low, bright as steel, illuminating the cabin the way fire outlines a sinner's shadow. And Colton, tired from days of riding, had no reason to expect trouble until the first soft crunch of hooves pressed into the earth beyond the tree line, a sound too many to be cattle and too deliberate to be coyotes. So he rose, slid his revolver into its holster, and stepped out into the cold, blue night, just as the entire world around him seemed to exhale danger. From the ridge, one torch lit, then another, and then another, until the whole horizon glowed like an ember curtain. And the moment Colton realized those lights were not flames, but war paints glinting in the moonlight. The entire Apache war party began moving forward, one rider, then 5, then 10, and then the full, unmistakable formation of 200 silent warriors dismounting, to encircle his cabin with disciplined precision that froze. The blood yet somehow filled the valley with a strange, ancient dignity. Colton didn't lift his gun because he knew enough about the Apaches to understand that drawing first meant dying first. So he stood tall, hands open, trying to read the wind, the faces, the meaning of this sudden storm of warriors. When the circle parted and a single rider came forward, a young woman sitting bareback on a painted mare, her long dark hair braided with red stone beads, her face marked not for war but for lineage, the daughter of the chief himself. Yet the strangest thing wasn't her presence or her rank, but the way she looked. Straight at Colton, not with anger or curiosity or caution, but with something he couldn't name, a kind of searching recognition, as if she had known him long before this night. Her eyes locked onto his like flint meeting steel, and the moment stretched so long that even the warriors seemed to sense it, glancing at each other, waiting for a command, while Colton struggled to understand why out of all the enemies, allies, strangers, and ghosts he'd met in the West, it was this young Apache woman who looked at him as though he was at the center of some prophecy she'd carried since childhood. She said nothing, not yet, but the chief stepped forward, an older man carved from stone and sun, raising one hand that silenced every warrior instantly, and in a deep voice like gravel rolling down a canyon he spoke, "White Cowboy, you sheltered someone who belonged to us." And Colton felt confusion flicker across his mind until he remembered the injured horse he found 2 nights earlier and the wounded boy it carried, a boy who collapsed in front of his cabin whispering only one word, "Help," before losing consciousness. Colton had tended him, fed him, wrapped his leg, and let him sleep by the fire without asking questions, only knowing that he couldn't leave a bleeding kid to die in the dust. Now he realized the warriors weren't here for war, they were here for that boy. And before he could speak, the chief's daughter slid gracefully off her horse, her eyes still fixed on him, her expression softening in a way that unsettled even Colton's iron nerves. She stepped closer, ignoring the whispers behind her, and asked in a voice warmer than the desert winds at dawn, "Why did you help my brother?" And Colton swallowed hard, stunned by the revelation that the boy was not just Apache but royalty, and managed to answer, "Because he needed someone," his voice steady even as her gaze dug deeper into him. The circle of warriors stood motionless as the chief nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in Colton's words, but the daughter did not step back. Instead, she continued looking at him with the intensity of someone seeing a man not for what he was, but what he could become in the story written between nations, blood and destiny. A story she seemed certain included him whether he understood it yet or not. When dawn finally bled across the sky in streaks of gold and fire, the 200 Apache warriors still surrounded the cabin, but the tension that had crackled like gunpowder the night before had shifted into something calmer, deeper, almost ceremonial, and Colton Hayes stood at the center of it all, trying to make sense of the way the world had changed in a matter of hours. The chief's wounded son, named Tohani, had been carried from the cabin on a makeshift stretcher woven from horse blankets, and while the boy slept peacefully, his leg wrapped in the careful bandages Colton applied, the warriors inspected every corner of the cabin, but never with hostility, more like protectors ensuring the boy had truly been cared for. All the while, the chief's daughter, whose name Colton now learned was Ayana, remained near him, always near him, as though invisible threads pulled her toward him with a certainty she didn't bother to hide, and the cowboy felt an unfamiliar unease stirring in his chest. Not the kind born of fear, but of recognition, the kind a man feels when he stands at the crossroads of fate and knows one direction leads back to the life he knows, while the other leads somewhere he can never return from. Sunrise painted her face in soft amber light, highlighting the quiet power she carried, a strength different from the warriors, but no less commanding. And Colton found himself speaking to her in low tones, asking about her people, her brother, her father, and she answered with a calm trust that surprised even herself, telling him how Tohani had been hunted by a rogue group of bandits who stole Apache horses and attacked their scouting party, how he'd escaped but didn't have the strength to ride home, how the tribe had followed his trail through the night until they found their way here. As she spoke, the chief approached, his presence heavy with authority, and told Colton that in their ways, a man who saves the life of the chief's blood earns a bond with the tribe that cannot be broken, whether he seeks it or not. But what unsettled the warriors wasn't the chief's declaration, it was the way Ayana stood beside Colton instead of returning to her father's side, her shoulder almost brushing the cowboy's arm, as though this bond meant something far more personal to her. Whispers rolled through the circle like a hidden tide, and Colton felt every gaze on him, some respectful, some suspicious, many confused. Yet Ayana remained unwavering, her eyes finding his with the same depth as the night before, and she said quietly, "You were alone before this, but you are not alone now," a statement that made his breath catch because she spoke it not as a comfort but as a truth she intended to defend. When Tohani finally awakened and confirmed Colton's kindness, the chief lifted his staff and the entire formation of 200 warriors bowed their heads to the cowboy in a rare gesture of honor, a sight so humbling Colton could barely speak. But before the ceremony ended, Ayana stepped forward in front of them all, her voice steady as she told her father that the spirits had whispered of a stranger whose path would cross hers, a man who would stand between worlds with courage instead of greed. And the chief, after studying Colton with the penetrating gaze of one who had seen countless seasons, nodded slowly and said, "If the spirits chose him, so be it." The warriors dispersed enough to form a path, and Ayana signaled for Colton to walk beside her, leading him away from the cabin, toward the rising sun, where the plains shimmered with new possibility. And Colton realized the truth. They hadn't surrounded the cabin to threaten him, but to measure him, to understand the man who had unknowingly stepped into the story of a tribe, a family, and a woman who now looked at him with a quiet devotion powerful enough to rewrite both their destinies as the warriors prepared to escort him to their village, not as a prisoner, but as an honored ally. Ayana gave him one last look, soft yet unwavering, a look that promised danger, loyalty, and a connection neither time nor war could break. And Colton knew in that moment that whatever journey lay ahead, it was one he could no longer imagine walking without her by his side. And viewers, if you want more stories like this, filled with courage, destiny, and heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because your support keeps these powerful tales alive.